There we go. Love the cloud. And then as some folks were saying at the beginning, I know that 6:30 for many folks is dinner time. I understand that there's kind of a discomfort some people have with eating in front of a Zoom camera. I will encourage people as much as possible to have your cameras on. If you're not able to, it's okay. But it just helps us to be able to see each other, to be able to kind of make this as less Zoom as possible, as more feeling of being in person as possible. So, welcome to Text Me Back to this class. And I wanted to start this class. I'm actually going to put up, there's going to be like a lot of screen sharing and then going off of screen share. So just be ready for that. But I wanted to share a quote from a rabbi named B'nai Lappi, who's a rabbi in Chicago. She runs a yeshiva called Svara. They're a traditionally radical yeshiva. And this is a quote from her. She says, I once heard my friend, Rabbi Lisa Edwards, teach her students something I'll never forget. She said, if donkeys read Torah, all the donkey stories would jump out at them. Every time they'd see a donkey, they'd say, hey, there I am. That's me. They'd see all the donkey stories that we barely even notice. And donkeys come up a surprising amount in Torah. There's like a lot of places that we get donkey donkey action, and we often gloss over, or we don't ask as many questions about those stories, that we don't focus on those things. And in the same way, the point of this is really that we should all be able to see ourselves in Jewish text, that there are characters and there are people and there are places that represent all of us, no matter our age, no matter our gender identity, no matter anything about us. We can find ourselves in text, and text comes alive when we're able to find ourselves in it, when we're able to look at a text and say, hey, that's me. That's me. I see me. I'm excited about that. And so as we go through this class, as we explore these texts, one of the things that we're going to be doing throughout the time is really exploring our own texts alongside Thank you, Corey. Yes, goats also. The goats would also see themselves in the text, although things often go better for the donkeys in Torah than they do for the goats.
I just brought it up because I know you love goats. So
I do love goats. No, I appreciate the goat shout out. But the point is that we should be able to see ourselves in text, and that this class will be so much more enriching if we dive in and if we see ourselves in these texts, and if we engage with them on a level that they really mean something, that this is important, that this is a part of who we are and where we came from. And in many places, Jews are called the people of the book. And the other, or kind of more appropriately now, people of the books. That it was, we were the people of the book. We had this one book, but we've produced so many books and so many texts over the years that that's kind of who we are as a people, is related to this idea of texts and books. So what we're going to do now is we are actually going to do introductions. It might take a little while, but I'm hoping that many of you will join us for the whole series. This is going to be a 10-week series of classes, and I'm hoping that many of you will join us every week and that we'll get to know each other and we'll create a community of study. And so as part of that, we're each going to introduce ourselves. And if that takes a little while this week, that's okay, because that way next week we don't all, we'll be seeing familiar faces and we'll be getting to know people even deeper. So what I'm going to ask is, each person is going to go around. You're going to say your name. You're going to say your background with Jewish text study, just so I get an idea of who's in the room. 0 is a totally acceptable answer. I went to rabbinical school for a couple years is also a totally acceptable answer. Anything in between is acceptable. So I've taken some classes with rabbis. This is my first time ever, just so that I can get a sense of who's in the room. That's what that question is for. And then the last question is, what is one text that you love or that you deeply relate to? So that could be a book, it could be a poem, it could be a song, it could be a piece of art. Text is broadly speaking here, but just one text that you love. So I'll go first, because I always, when I ask challenging questions of people, I like to give them a little bit of time to think about it. So my name is Ben Fried, or Rabbi Ben Fried, and I have studied Jewish texts a lot, especially the last 5 years. I've been in a pretty immersive text study experience. And one text that I really love, my favorite book, is called The Source by James Michener. And it's a historical fiction book set in the land of Israel that kind of tells the story of the land of Israel from like prehistory all the way to what, when it was written, was the present day, is now like the 1960s. But it's a book that to me really gets across the breadth and the of the history of the land and its people, and the intertwinedness of the people who call that land home. And so I really love it. So do I have a brave volunteer to go next to introduce themselves? Eileen, go ahead. Lots of brave volunteers. That was wonderful.
I'm Eileen Kaplan. I am not probably as observant, I would say, as most of the people here, but I've been a member of Knesset my whole life, and I worked in the office for 3 years, et cetera, et cetera. My favorite book was The Red Tent. I love that book. And so I want anyone who wants to give us references, I will learn, I will absorb it. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
Great, thank you. The Red Tent is a wonderful example of modern midrash, and we'll be talking about that more in future classes. So thank you, Eileen. All right, I saw Lee's hand also went up when I asked for brave volunteers.
Okay, I'm Lee Byrd. Among other things, right now I'm president of KI. I have done a fair amount of text study. I did Melton quite a few years ago, and I've been attending the Jews and Brews class on a regular basis for probably close to 10 years. My favorite text from the Torah is about Jacob wrestling with the angel, because it just talks about sort of, for me, how this all sort of works, and that we wrestle with the divine and the human world, and it never gets resolved, and yet we walk away limping. So whenever I struggle with a text, that's what I think of. So.
Wonderful. And we're going to be talking more today specifically about texts that we struggle with. So thank you for bringing that up, that we don't always come away from a text thinking that it's amazing, that sometimes it takes more of a struggle to get into a text. All right, who else had raised their, did you just want to go because we were already on your screen? Or
Well, yeah, sure. So I'm Russell Byrd,
First
husband. And in terms of both, I'm thinking Jewish texts, both biblical and non-biblical. I remember enjoying reading Pirkei Avot many years ago. We did a previous synagogue in Pennsylvania. I enjoyed that. In terms of nonfiction, Wanderings by Chaim Potok, I believe is the author, which is just a sprawling, even beyond the source, it's just sprawling history of the Jews. But actually, sort of a modern day fiction, Michael Chabon, the Yiddish Policemen's Union, which is this alternative history of Israel never happened, and all the Jews are up in Sitka, Alaska. And I won't go into the details, but it really talks about, what it's an interesting parallel, put it that way. So it was, I won't go into the details, but nonetheless, that's a great read. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. A number of book recommendations are coming out of this. This is wonderful. Corey, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Corey. Most of you probably know me already. Anyway, I first of all, I have a BA, Bachelor's of Arts in Jewish Studies from American University. So I have a little bit of background in it, although it's been a while since I was in school for that. I studied in Israel. When I was in Israel, we did a lot of midrash, a lot of study sessions or whatever, and I did attend some of those. I also liked Pirkei Avot when we were doing that. But my favorite books, like right now, are like when I have time, and of course, I started this book when I visited the Wokes actually, and they gave it to me. I have it right here. It's called A River Could Be a Tree. I don't know if anybody's read it. It's a memoir about somebody who converted to Judaism and grew up in Indiana, very Christian households. Anyway, I've only read a little bit of it, so I want to finish it. I thought I would do it maybe in the hospital. That didn't happen. Anyway, I also like, those kind of texts. Like, I really want to read The Tattooist of Auschwitz. I went on the March of Living, so I'm really interested in books like of, again, memoirs and stuff like that as well. So there you
Great.
go.
Thank you so much, Corey.
Yes.
All right, who's next?
We'll go.
Oh, go ahead, Zach and Shelby.
Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Shelby. This is Zach. We were introduced to Rabbi Ben Fried and his lovely wife Ariane by Alan and Faye Roth, and we are so happy to be getting to know them as they transition here to living in Louisville. And we're married. I'm Jewish, and Zach didn't really grow up religious in any sense. And as we start to think about our family in the future, we thought it would be interesting to attend this series that Ben is hosting. And yeah, so I was bat mitzvahed, but I haven't really done a lot of text study, and I'm really interested to learn more. Corey, I really recommend The Tattooist of Auschwitz. It is fantastic, but have some tissues nearby. On a similar tone, I just recently did a reread of one of my favorite books, The Book Thief, which is a historical fiction set in the time of World War II. And it is always a very eye-opening read. The narrator is deaf, and it brings up a lot of questions and big thoughts. Yeah.
And I'm Zach again, and I use he, him pronouns. I think one thing that's stuck with me is actually a play. So I work at Actors Theater of Louisville, so I read many more plays than I do books. And there was a play that we premiered 5 or 6 years ago called The Glory of the World, which was kind of not at all a biography, but more of a reflection on the thoughts and themes that were explored by Thomas Merton and his kind of prolific writings and explorations of mysticism and the play was really more about all of the various groups and peoples and denominations that claimed him as their own. And kind of their thinking about him rather than what he was actually writing and considering himself. So that was a fun piece I like to go back to.
Wonderful, thank you. And one of the things that brings up is that a lot of the texts that we'll look at, our view of them will change over the years, that the way that we look at a text as modern Jews might be different than a way that medieval Jews looked at a text. Or there might be some texts that a conservative Jew reads one way and a Reformed Jew reads another way and a Christian person reads a third way, and that we're all looking at the same thing. But sometimes the way we read a text, the way we interpret it is gonna, what we're bringing to this text is gonna impact the way that we look at it. So thank you so much for sharing, Zach and Shelby. All right, Beth, you're up. Oh, sorry, Bryant, and then Haynes.
My name is Beth Bryant. I have been a member of the tribe for almost a year. I've done a lot of intensive study over the last 4 years to get to that point. I've taken over 40 Milton classes in that 4 years. And I love The Source. That's one of my very favorite books of all time. But in this process of the last 4 years, Anita Diamant's book, Choosing a Jewish Life, incredible. And the other one that really gives me chills, and I've got cold chills right now, is Rabbi Joseph Teluskin's Jewish Literacy. It's wonderful, especially from somebody coming from a non-Jewish background. It covers everything. And I am so thankful and proud to be where I am today.
And we're thankful to have you with us. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
All right, Beth Haynes.
Hi, I'm Beth Haynes, currently treasurer at Knesset Israel. I have not done a lot of text or Bible study, so that's why I'm taking the class to learn more and get more involved with the more of the learning aspect now that my kids are grown and gone. trying to, get more, I guess, Hebrew and Bible knowledge, and getting more involved. So I don't have a favorite, I guess, text, but I will kind of piggyback off Eileen, and I did love the red tent as well.
That's a text. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Cindy, I see you're unmuted. I'm going to call on you.
Okay. I'm Cindy Biedenhofen. I've been a member of KI probably about 6-7 years, somewhere in there, 6-7 years. And I started a little bit of Talmud, and but I haven't really gotten into it. But every week I kind of go over our Torah portion. Growing up, one of my favorite stories out of the Bible was Joseph and all his brothers. And I would share it with my younger brother and sister. I guess I wanted to make sure they knew how to behave or something, or how to be, brotherly and sisterly. But the other thing I like that anything by Chaim Proctal, the one who wrote The Chosen. And one of my favorites of his is Davida's Heart.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Nathan, and then Harriet.
I'm Nathan Goldman. I've studied in Milton classes, adult ed classes, as general personal study for a long time because I'm old. I'm very fond of Pirkei Avos as well, and Jewish text. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite authors is Isaac Bashevis Singer. I think his novels are some of my favorite novels.
Wonderful. Thank you. Harriet, and then Lauren, you're on deck.
Harriet Frankel Firkins. And wow, I have Ethics of the Fathers is one of my favorites. Pirkei Avot. I have interesting. I like Ecclesiastes. It's my go-to because of my age. I don't like, how do I put this? It says, I don't want to study, I want to live it. And one of the things that I have a problem with, and not you or the class, is that sometimes we get so involved in studying about it. Do we live it? Do we put it into actuality? So that when I wrote this thing that I won in the 9th grade, and it says Judaism isn't a religion for me, it's a way of life. So when we do that, those of us who are older, who have lived through World War II and all those things, we see it differently. And I end up with Leo Roston, The Joys of Yiddish. You want a good read and you want to laugh, that's it.
Well, thank you. We should all aspire to the wisdom of 9th grade, Harriet. Thank you. All right, Lauren, and then Cheryl, you're up next.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lauren. Okay. I had so long to think about it, and I still didn't think about it very much. I guess my favorite Bible story is probably Ruth. But as far as like how much study I've done, I haven't done a ton. I guess like formal study. I've read like obviously the Tanakh like on my own and stuff. And then I have been a member of Jews and Brews for a minute. Not super long as Lee has, but we're getting there. And I think my favorite, I guess, non-Bible story, I actually have it next to me, hold on. So it kind of started me on this journey of like, I guess not being Jewish, but like living a more like Jewish life. It's called Why Be Jewish? I literally picked it up like on a whim at a bookstore about 3 years ago. And that was because I kind of struggled with my identity a lot, like as a patrilineal Jew. So like I'm not even really Jewish, I'm Jewish. And so I picked it up just kind of on a whim, and it made me, I guess, question myself and like my identity more, and like made me realize that this is something that I really wanted to do and wanted to like be a part of. And so now I'm here. So I guess this is like my pinnacle book. So
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is a memoir for Corey, if you want to read it. Why Be Jewish? A Testament by Edgar Bronfman. So
Edgar Bronfman.
Yeah.
All righty. So we're gonna go to Cheryl, and then Elliot, and then Max.
Hi, I'm Cheryl. I'm pretty new to KI too, and as far as study, I took a couple of Morton classes with Rabbi Miles recently, and then I had just started sort of studying with Rabbi Wolk before he left. So this is my first class, other than a couple of like non-study conversations with Rabbi Fried. But as far as books, I will second the others who've said Anita DeMont. The Red Tent I read in high school. I was actually a student. I wasn't Catholic, but I was a student at a Catholic high school, and that was one of our assigned readings. And then Choosing a Jewish Life was a good one. And I just started reading a book. It's called Why the Jews? And it's a study of why Jews have been targeted as with anti-Semitism throughout history and like the different manifestations and explanations of that. So I'll report back and let you know how it is.
Yeah, if you can figure it out, that'd be great. Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. All right, Elliot and then Max. Oh, Elliot, you're muted.
This better?
Yep, much better.
I'm Elliot Sadel. I have been to a number of rabbinically and cantorally taught classes as an adult. Some on my own. As far as my favorite book, I would say The Revolt by Menachem Begin. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. Probably not many. That's his experiences leading the Etzel during the revolt against the British.
Yeah.
As far as in the Tanakh, my favorite would be Psalm 27.
It's a good one. An oldie but a goodie, as they say. All right. Thank you, Elliot. Max, and then after Max, Lewis, you're going to be up.
Well, I wasn't here for the question.
Oh,
so I can
okay,
only...
so you're saying, so Max and I think the Roth, Alan, and I don't know if Faye is with you also, but you're saying your name, how much Jewish text study you've done, if any, and then a favorite text, and that could be a book, it could be a story from the Bible, it could be a psalm, it could be a song, it could be a poem, anything, just a text that speaks to you.
Great. I'm Max Green. I'm not nearly as well read as anybody so far. So I'm basically here to learn everything. I'm taking notes, what people are saying, and I'm really excited to read some of these books. So I'll get back to you on my favorite one.
Okay, sounds good. Lewis, and then the Roths, who don't have their camera on, so I don't know which ones are there.
Hi, I'm Lewis Rowe, and just here to soak up everything you got to say. And if there was a text, it'd have to be Shalom Aleichem. It's probably the favorite text that I resort to for reading. But as far as Jewish texts, Tanakh and Talmud, probably underread on those issues.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you.
I turn the light off.
All right, Alan. Alan, you're muted. No one can hear you.
There you go.
There we go.
All right. Faith here, but we're both listening and participating a little bit here. So I'm Alan Roth. I've been a member of KI forever, as my parents were. I don't go back as many generations as the Weinbergs do, but I've been a member a long time. I actually did more studying and reading when my kids were younger, when they were in Hebrew school and their bar mitzvah age, because I wanted to just have a better understanding of their parshas, as well as the Var Torahs that I did number of years ago. And I'm more of a biographical reader than I am a fiction reader, and I've read about the Israeli independence and about 6-Day War and some of the biography of Golda Meir and Begin. So, but it's been a while, and I really haven't taken I've done little courses like this with the rabbi or cantor in the past, but never really gotten into any continual study on a regular basis.
Great. And Faye, do you want to say hi?
Hello, I'm cooking.
Okay. What's one, Faye, what's one text that you love? It can be a poem, a book, a song.
Here's actually where I've been this last number of years, which is to say, culturally speaking, I have always been more Jewish than religiously so. And what I find myself doing as I've just in the last few years, I've gotten back into reading novels. And over, I find myself finding novels, Jewish authors, Jewish themes, and it kind of makes me question my own, well, wait a minute, where am I in all that? Daniel Silva's books, the protagonist, Gabriel Alon, is an Israeli. He's actually an assassin who becomes kind of the head of the the whole underground. And when you start listening and reading things that are fictionalized but based in truth, I find myself very, very involved in where is my own head in all that. So actually, I've been a fictional Jew for a while now.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully you won't see yourself too much in the assassin's role.
No, I would rather not.
But thank you. So I think that was, did anyone not share? I think that was everyone. I just want to make sure I didn't accidentally skip over someone. Great. Okay, and hopefully no one's just not saying anything because they didn't really want to say anything. But it's wonderful to have all of you here. And I know that took a little while, but I think it was actually really important. I think it's important to hear everyone's voices, for everyone to get a chance to know who else is in the room, because hopefully we're all going to be studying together for the next 10 weeks or so. So what we're going to do today, so just a little bit about the class before we start. So the idea is that throughout the 10 weeks, each week, we are going to focus on a particular Jewish text. So that might be the Torah, it might be Midrash, or it might be a genre of Jewish text. So Midrash, or it might be Talmud, or it might be poetry and song. Like each week is going to have a different genre of text. And then each week is also going to focus on a topic. So Shabbat, or Passover, or Kashrut, or different things. So it's an opportunity both to get kind of a bird's eye view introduction of a lot of different Jewish concepts and an introduction to a lot of Jewish texts. And the way we're going to do is we're actually going to work chronologically. We're going to start with the oldest texts and work forward, because as you'll see, so much of Jewish text is about intertextuality, that each text is really building on the text that came before. So as we go to later and later texts, we're not just going to study those, we'll also study the text that they're based on. So as we go, then you'll start seeing that there are going to be layers of text. And so what we're going to do today is we're kind of just going to focus on this idea of text study and how are we going to study text. And we're going to kind of use some of the tools that we are going to use throughout this class to unpack Jewish text. These are tools that my Jews and Brews crew will be familiar with, that we use a lot in Jews and Brews, and starting to look at them. And I think that hopefully by half an hour from now, we'll have an idea of kind of where we're going, and y'all will get a sense from me of how I look at text and how I like to unpack it, because that's going to be kind of the vibe as we move forward. So I am going to share my screen, and a few things to be ready for. I'm going to ask for volunteers to read. Most of these texts are in both Hebrew and English. The general expectation, if you're a volunteer, is that you'll read it in English. If you want to show off and read it in Hebrew, that's totally fine. Just please read it in English after, so that everyone can be on the same page and understand. A note about the fact that there's English is every text that's in translation, as my Jews and Brews crew knows, every translation is an interpretation. So there will be times when I'll stop and I'll say, oh, actually, because I don't do most of these translations. I'll let you know if it's me translating something, but I'll say, oh, like this word could mean any one of these three things and they chose to have it mean this one, or this is, you know, not as precise a translation as it could be, or this is a precise translation, but it's a translation they chose, that they read into this a certain thing. So we are going to be reading in English, but just to know that when we're not reading in the original language, that there is a certain level of kind of 1 degree of removal that we have from the text that just comes along with this. So with all of those disclaimers, we're going to get to some text. And the text that I chose for today will at first seem like a surprising choice. It is not a text that normally one would think of as kind of an introductory text for like all of Jewish text study, but I chose it with we're going to get to a later text that's going to tie everything together. So just go with me on this. Trust the process. Okay, so I'm just gonna, sorry, I just need to adjust my screen so that I can see all of you as I'm doing this. Zoom is wonderful, but it doesn't always make things hard for someone trying to lead a class with a screen share. Okay, so we are going to, so we're gonna start with our biblical text. So we're gonna start with our oldest layer of text, and this is the oldest of the old, is the book of Genesis. This is a part of the creation story, and just to give you a little bit of context for where we are in Genesis chapter 3, so right at the beginning of Genesis, and Adam and Eve made the grievous error of eating from the tree of life or the tree of knowledge, depending on which time they're talking about. And the snake tricked them, and then they hid from God, and God found them. And then we arrive at our verse, which is where God is doling out the punishments, so to speak, to everyone, to Adam, to Eve, and to the snake. And specifically, we are going to look at the punishment or the curse that was given to Eve. And as I said before, I forget who mentioned, I think it was Lee who mentioned that some texts are difficult. Some texts are harder than others. This is a text that's like hard, and we're going to wrestle with it. And part of why we're learning this today is to really emphasize that not every text that we come across are we going to like. Not every text that we come across are we going to agree with, and that's okay. That just because someone said it 1,500 years ago doesn't make it necessarily truth. There's a lot of wisdom there, and we don't discount what was said 1,500 years ago, but that we are a part of the discussion. So, with, again, all of those disclaimers, would someone like to read for us Genesis 3, chapter 3, verse 16?
I will.
Go for it.
And to the woman he said, I will make most severe your pangs in childbearing. In pain shall you bear children, yet your urge shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. I read that already before, and as soon as you said, like, take it with a grain of salt, I basically was like, yeah, right.
So I love the ha. I love that was your midrash on this verse. That was your commentary. One quick note here. I do generally try to adjust translations that refer to God as he. I missed that one here. Usually I just refer to God as God. I don't use any gendered pronouns for God because God is God, and God is, God. So just wanted to note that there. But great. So as we do with texts, the first thing that I want to do is I want to ask y'all, what questions does this text raise for you? What initial comments do you have? What initial reactions do you have to it? What are things that this is bringing up for you that you're feeling when reading this text? There's no right or wrong answer. It could be a question about a word choice. It could be a question about why is this even a thing? Like, there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong answers, but just questions, comments, initial things. Before we get to what commentators say, before we get to what other people think about the text, I want to start with what it does for us initially.
Can you move it up, please?
I can. I just want to move it up just a little bit, though, because I don't want to spoil like all the things that come next. Is that better?
I actually said the ha in mostly the wrong place. I feel like, even though it said husband, I feel like the ha should be after and he shall rule over you. Like, why should your husband rule over you as a woman? And I think that is absurd, especially in these times. Another thing that it brought up for me is, what if you can't have children? What happens then? What if you're unable to? We had Sarah is a perfect example, right? Who couldn't have a child for a long time. For whatever reason, we don't know the reason, but what if she really couldn't have a child still in that time? And there's nothing wrong with that. It brings up, anyway, that's what it brings up for me.
Great. So a couple of things I want to highlight that you said. One is this idea of the husband ruling over, to our 21st century brains, feels very incongruous and feels very weird. It assumes a heteronormativity, and it assumes that one should want to have children, and it assumes that everyone can have children. So that's great. Thank you, Corey, for pointing all of those things out. Lee or Russ, I don't know who unmuted there.
Yeah, no, I also find the he shall rule over you really interesting, mostly because up until really very recently, women were property of their husbands. I mean, it was even in the 1970s, you had to let your husband had to say you could get a credit card. So women couldn't divorce their husbands 100 years ago. I mean, it's a really modern concept that men don't rule over husbands, or whatever. Women aren't ruled by their husbands. That's very, very modern. And I find it interesting that the idea of it is very, very ancient.
Thank you. Elliot, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes. First thing is, reading this, I am pretty sure it was written by a man. And to put it in historical context, through most of history, most work was manual. You didn't have the learned professions 3,000 years ago. Men, being generally bigger and stronger, were the producers, were the providers. Men could go out hunting, they could do the heavy lifting, building things. Women just biologically can't do those things. And that is why I think men were dominant through most of history. It has changed now because we have the learned professions. Women can be doctors, lawyers, scientists, and everything else. So it has enabled equality. Equality 100 years ago would have been impossible.
Great. So one thing that you said there that we're not going to get into today was that it was probably written by a man. We're not going to get into biblical authorship today. There's lots of discussion about who exactly wrote the Bible, who exactly wrote the Torah, and that's a long discussion for another time. But it's certainly a safe assumption that if humans had anything to do with it, it was probably men who were writing it down. I see Eileen.
Punishment.
What was that, Harriet?
It's punishment. They were being punished for whether it was the apple, for whatever else it was punishment.
Right. So this is great. So what Harriet's saying is that this idea of subservience is in and itself a punishment, that it's not perhaps the way things were supposed to be, but it's the way that things were as part of that punishment. So I see a couple hands up, but I think Eileen wanted to say something. So we're going to go Eileen, then Lauren, then Zach and Shelby.
I see that yet your urge shall be for your husband. In other words, you go through all the pain and suffering, and you can bear anything for your husband because he rules over you.
Great. Yeah. So that the urge is connected to
Yes.
that. Wonderful. Thank you, Eileen. Lauren.
Okay, so 2 comments, and one of them I know you said we're not going to get into today, but I just want to make the comment. The first one though is that, do you think God was like, whoops, sorry about that, and that's why the epidural exists? Okay. The second thing is that I took a religious a comparative religions course, I guess, and when we looked at the Torah and compared it to I guess the interpretation from a Jewish perspective versus the Christian perspective, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that was really thematic across all of these, different religions that have this text was that it's often talked about as if this it wasn't written down as it was happening, right? And so more than likely what happened was that it was written as an explanation for something that already existed. And so I don't know, I thought that was just a really interesting comment where we already see that women have childbirth pains, so it was because of God. If that makes any sense.
Right. So is this text an explanation for the way the world as we see it, for why the world as we see it is the way it is, or is it a quote unquote true origin story for
Right.
the way the world came into being? Wonderful.
Yeah.
It's a great, yeah, that's a fascinating question. All right, Zach and Shelby, and then Cheryl, and then we're gonna move on to our next text.
Great. Yeah, this is, having not been somebody that does a lot of like textual analysis of ancient text, but I'm realizing how important, Ben, as you were saying, the interpretive aspect and the translation aspect is, in specifically the word pangs, because all of the other words in this verse feel so like the translation of them feels so clear to me. I know what pain is. I know what husband is. I know what rule is in several different contexts. But the word pangs, I'm like, ooh, that feels like such an like a feeling or an interpretive language or something that seems very specific to English. Like that feeling of a pang is so interpretive that I'm like, well, I don't even like reading this. That could be so many different things in that one line just because of that one word.
Yeah, what it is, and just to explain that one word a little bit, is it's basically that this writing is a little bit poetic and it uses multiple words for pain. And so this is the translator attempting to mimic some of that poetry going forward. So Cheryl, and then I'm sorry, Corey, I see that you have your hand. I missed it before. So we'll do Cheryl and then Corey, and then we'll move on to the next text.
I was just gonna say a similar thing that I vaguely remember like seeing a note in a translation that the word pain, one of the words they use for pain is similar to the word for toil or work or labor. And so it's not really about pain. It's like, you guys are kicked out of the Garden of Eden and he has to work the field and you have to work to populate the earth. And when I read the passage, I kind of smile because I work with I was trained by Robin Weiss as a doula, and that's my job, is to support women through childbearing. And I see women constantly who say it's the best day of their life. It's the most beautiful experience they've ever had. It's life-changing, who don't want an epidural, who want to do things the natural way and experience this thing. And so when they talk about your desire shall be, like, women keep having babies and they don't, and it's kind of like, for me, I'm like, that's not really a great punishment, because most of the people that I work with, like, this is their life dream come true, is to have this experience and have their baby and experience it all in like a natural way. And none of them ever look back on it and go and we say like, how was that for you? And they just say, oh, it was horrible, painful. That's all I remember. It's always like, this is a beautiful, spiritual, like transformative experience. And so I guess I just have a different perspective since the last time I saw this passage in like taking on that line of work. And it just kind of makes me laugh a little bit.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Corey, did you want to share something else?
I just had two things to say. Sorry. I respectfully disagree with Elliot. I think that no matter what time period it was, that women could do anything, and that it doesn't matter. It doesn't forgive the fact that that was the way it was then. It's just like people treated, African American or Black people wrong, Jews wrong before. That doesn't mean that the time doesn't matter, the age doesn't matter. It's still, women could have gone out and hunted, and they do now. And so I don't give that credit, but I understand what he was trying to say, but anyway, that's it. My other comment is, it's important to note that I think that there are still society, that culture that does provide the man is the one who is in charge. Women look to the man to decide things. It's part of their family culture. And I'm not saying it's wrong in that sense. It's how they were raised, it's their tradition or whatever. And you have to respect that as well. Judaism has done a great deal of changing, and there's still things within Judaism and other sects or religious, Orthodox Judaism that is different from ours. So I just thought it was important to point that out. So
great. So wonderful. So I especially want to appreciate that we can disagree with each other in this class also. Just like we can see a text that we disagree with, it's okay to disagree, and respectful disagreement is a key part of Jewish text that they even have a name for it. It's called machloket l'shem shamayim, which in Hebrew means an argument for the sake of heaven. And what we have here is that we can have arguments that are for the sake of heaven, as long as we're not attacking anyone's, person or saying like mean things about them. As long as we're arguing on a point, then we can totally do that, and that's totally fine. And people should feel comfortable disagreeing in class. Because you were disagreed with, Elliot, if you have something quick, and then we really need to keep moving because I do have some stuff I want to get to before we end. You're muted, Elliot. You're still muted.
There we go. Okay, I understand Corey's point, but by biology, men are physically stronger than women. Always have been, I expect always will be, on the average. I'm not saying 100%. When hunting was done basically with blunt instruments, you club the critter to get death.
Okay.
Elliot,
I'm just going to cut you off because we're not going to get into a discussion today about whether or not women can hunt or could hunt or could hunt with wicked instruments. That's just not what we're going to do today. So we're going to keep moving. And what we're going to do now is, because we spent a lot of time on introductions and in this kind of initial text, I'm going to walk us through a little more quickly a couple of the next texts, because then I want to get to the last text that I think is going to kind of be more interesting and peel this apart a little bit. So what I brought was a series of texts commenting on this verse or using this verse to make a point. So in the Talmud, we have here one kind of interpretation or use of this. They're arguing over when exactly men and women should be, or husbands and wives, I should say, in their case, should be having sex. And they say that it's that the ruling is derived from this verse. The Talmud does a lot of this, where when we get to Talmud, you'll see it will quote verses from the Torah to prove a point. So there's some point they're trying to prove, and they say it's derived from this verse. And your desire shall be to your husband. And this comes to teach us that a wife desires her husband when he's about to depart on a journey. So here you can see that they're taking this as a very idea of sexual desire, and that it impacts when exactly this couple should be able to have sex. That's all I was going to show you from there. We could go deeper into that, but we're not going to right at this minute. Then we have this piece of Midrash, which Midrash, as you can see in parentheses, rabbinic fan fiction. If you like Midrash, you should take Ariane, my wife's class, Midrash, which meets on Tuesdays, not tomorrow, but we'll meet again the following Tuesday, which is all about looking at Midrash and writing your own Midrash. We'll spend one day on Midrash later this year. But this Midrash, basically it takes, it fills in some holes, again, using biblical allusion. So the Midrash here actually is about Esther, the book of Esther. And it imagines Daniel talking to Achashverosh, the king in the book of Esther. And it says that whoever keeps the Torah, the Holy One preserves his kingdom, because Achashverosh's kingdom was preserved. And you might think his keeping the Torah is the fact that he didn't kill all the Jews. But no, the keeping the Torah that Achashverosh did was, as it says, and he shall rule over you, or the husband shall rule over you. And the king, when Vashti didn't dance for him, sent out a ruling to all of the provinces that said every man shall bear ruler in his own house. That King Achashverosh kind of emphasized this ruling, and that was why he was allowed to remain the king, even when he almost killed all of the Jews. So again, you might have questions about this. There's lots going on here. The point of showing you these texts was just to show you how intertextual all of these texts are, that this same text will appear in multiple places and be used in different ways by different texts. So it's not that important that you grasp all of like the minute detail of each of these texts. The last text before we get to our to the one that I want to focus on is from Rashi, we're going to talk a lot about Rashi eventually, and you'll hear his name come up. He's a major commentator. He commented on the entire Bible and the entire Talmud. He lived in 11th century France. He was incredibly prolific, and he right. And so he also, and he gives kind of these very straightforward. He gives the like, I wonder what that means. He'll give you an answer for that. So in this case, it's like, and your husband will be your desire. I wonder what they're talking about desire. Rashi says for sex. Like he just like, he's not interested in the flowery, the stories. He's going to like kind of give you the explanation of what it's about. And what does he will rule over you mean? For Rashi, it means that the woman will have desire, but won't be able to actually explicitly say her desire, but rather the man will still be the one to initiate sex. That's how he sees this. Again, these are not texts that I'm bringing because I think they're good or I think they're right. They're simply examples of different ways that this verse is used throughout centuries and throughout time to show the intertextuality between all of these different verses. Now, we are going to spend a little bit of the little bit of time we have left with this modern midrash. So this is from a collection called Dir Shoony, which is a collection of midrashim written by Israeli women. So modern Israeli midrash written in the style of 1st and 2nd century rabbis in the land of Israel. So they're using the same, they're written in Hebrew, they're using the same language and the same techniques for playing with text that the rabbis used to do their commentary 2,000 years ago. And they're bringing a uniquely female perspective to the text that is going to make it read very differently. So I'm also going to read this one just for time's sake, because we really, the introductions and everything were amazing. It just like made me crunch a little bit on time. And I do want to get through this. So, and I'm going to read it in Hebrew. And then, so this is my translation. So any quibbles you have with the translation, you can take up with me. I am going to read in the Hebrew and then translate because the sounds of the words are important here. That one of the things that Midrash does often is it will do wordplay, where it will associate different words that sound similar and use kind of like puns in order to make their point. So, Mahu v'hu yimshal bach. What is the meaning of v'hu yimshal bach? And he will rule over you. Lo nitkalela chava. Ele b'mashalim sheyimshalu aleha bnei adam. Eve was only cursed by the mashalim, by the allegories, the metaphors, the stories that her fellow humans yimshalu told about her. So vehu yimshal bach, you hear that yimshal, the root for that mem shin lamed means rule over, but it also means to allegorize or to tell a story or to tell a fable. And so this modern Israeli woman said, the power that men have over women is not that God put them in charge, it's that they were able to, using the power of language, rule over them. And she says, our sages, may their memories be blessed, compared himshilu, again, you hear that masha la, himshilu, you hear those same 3 letters come back, himshilu women to everything in the world. Ratzu lahamshil lekos, himshilu, they wanted to himshil, compare them to a cup, they compared them. Chafsu lishtahvan lebasar hashvu, they desired to equate them with meat, they equated them. Bikshu lidmutan lepat, dimu, they wanted to visualize them as a loaf of bread, and that's how they visualized them. Ivu letaren kakarka tiaru, they desired to portray them as earth, and they portrayed them. And each of those come from a portion of the Talmud where the rabbis compared women to these different things in order to make a point. So she's taking the allegories, the metaphors that men were using about women to show how those gave women power. They gave men the power over women. Hayu hen be'enehen ketavshil, kekavsut, ke'avzot, kegufo shel adam, v'gam kechamat maleh b'dvar ze o ze, v'cha'arva. They, women, were in their eyes, in the eyes of the rabbis, like a cooked dish, like sheep, like a goose, like the body of a man, like a gourd filled with this thing or another, and like nakedness. Again, these are all examples of things that women are compared to in rabbinic text. But then she says, La'atid lavo yitkayem, hishbati et hamashal hazeh, v'lo yimshelu oto od b'Yisrael. One day we will see the words of the prophet fulfilled, and then we get a quote from the prophet Ezekiel. I will put an end to this mashal, to this ruling over, or to this story It shall not be used in Israel anymore. Lo yimshelu oto od be'Israel. And what I love about this, and the reason I wanted to bring this text here today, is this is a woman who herself is doing the mashal. She is now doing the metaphor, the parable. She is doing this thing that was the power of man over woman, and she's turning that around and taking it to task. And there's just a few things that I want to point out about this. One is the power of us, of people, to again, see ourselves in the text and to write ourselves into the text in the way we want to. Two, I want to point out, she does not raise up or show the rabbinic text, the Talmudic text, in a very positive light. She's saying these were all bad things that were done. We also have the power when we read texts in this class to agree with them, to disagree with them, to love them, to not like them so much. And then lastly, she takes this verse that is so difficult, that can be so painful to read in a 21st century context, and she makes it really beautiful. She makes it one that we can read and say, oh, this idea of men being the only ones to have the power to make metaphor, to make parable, to make these words, almost kind of like what Eliot said, to be the ones who are doing the intellectual work, is just not the way we are anymore. That she's proving by the very fact that she's writing this, that she is a part of the story now. And not only is she a part of the story, but she is an author, a co-author of the story. And I hope that as we dive into these texts together, that we can see ourselves as co-authors of this Jewish story. I want to close by sharing a story that was told by a rabbi who probably wouldn't have liked that midrash. His name was Rabbi Soloveitchik. He is one of the great rabbis of modern Orthodoxy. And he tells this story, and in his story, this rabbi comes in to teach a Talmud class, and the rabbi's kind of worn down, and he's like, how am I going to teach these kids anything? But then he sees in his imagination, first the Talmudic rabbis come in and start arguing, and then the commentators come into the room and they start yelling at each other and arguing, and then his students are standing up and arguing back with them and entering into the conversation. And it is through their entering into the conversation that he's revived. And that idea of we are all part of this Beit Midrash, we're all part of this great study hall that spans the generations, and that our study, what we're doing, is just as important as the studying that was done 500 or 800 or 2000 years ago, and that we're going to come to new answers because we have a 21st century mind, and we're going to read these texts differently than the rabbis did. And I'm really, really excited to explore these texts and see where we come to with them, with all of y'all. Corey, is it quick?
I just had a question on, you couldn't scroll back up, but who wrote that? Who was it coming from again?
So her name is Donna Palvar. It's one of a collection. This is the book. This is actually volume 2. That one came from volume 1, but it's called Dear Shoony, which means interpret for me. And it's a collection of modern midrashim written by Israeli women. It's edited by a woman named Tamar Biala, who's amazing. I've heard her speak a number of times. And you'll see when we get to our weeks on Midrash and when we get to our weeks on modern and contemporary Jewish writing, this book will come back. It's a really, really rich text, because it uses, again, those tools of wordplay and looking at the root of the Hebrew word and those things. Those are tools of classical Midrash. Those are tools of the rabbis 1500, 2000 years ago that they're using to bring new meaning to text. And it's really an amazing collection. So next week, we'll be talking more about the Torah a little bit more expansively, and about different things going on in Torah, and different texts that we'll pull to look at it. We'll say, like, what is the Torah even? Donna Palvar, thank you. Is it a law book? Is it a book of stories? What are we supposed to get from it? Who knows? So we're going to talk about Torah. That's coming attractions. That's next week. I hope you'll all join us. Did anyone else have any last questions or comments before we go?
Thank you.
Sorry, then one last thing. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If there is something in this class, if there is a specific text or a question about Judaism or something that you are really hoping we're going to cover at some point over the course of these 10 weeks, please email me and let me know, and I will do my best to work it into the syllabus. So I'm putting my email. My email is in the chat. Please, 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 if there is a specific thing that you want to learn about, whether it's a topic or a text, please let me know in the chat, and I will do my best to work it into the curriculum. I'm just developing this as I go. It should be fun. I'm having fun so far. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. I had a really great time with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shelby. Shelby, are you still there? No, she left. Do you have the book, The Tattooist at Auschwitz?
I do not, but Shelby might. Do you want me?
I'll text her. I have her number.
Great. Okay. Wonderful.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Lila
Have
Tov,
a good
everyone. Have a
night.
good night.
Lila Tov.